go.
Hey everybody, what you're going to see here is a video of having to redo the front spindle on our Ditch Witch SK750. It went out in the field. We've been having, if I remember correctly, the dust cap had come off this thing a couple times in the past, and I think we probably got some dirt in there, just shortly after we had figured out the dust cap was off of it. So I think that's part of what led to the unraveling of this thing, as time has gone on. The machine's at about 1,100 or 1,400 hours, I can't remember, and those things are under a lot of pressure. They get, when you load that thing too heavy or whatever, it's riding heavily on those front two spindles. So it's not super shocking this thing went out to me, as they take a big brunt of the abuse, actually. So this thing went out on the job site. We had to pick it up with our actual Bobcat T595 and carry it and set it in the back of the dump trailer. I took it to the house and was able to get parts quick and get it back together, and this is the video on that.
Well, here's the Ditch Witch without her tracks on. And you can see the roller bearings and stuff here just came undone, so getting this replaced. Usually I'll hire this kind of repair out. This is pretty simple and not time consuming overly, and I need it back to work Monday anyhow, and it's just gratifying to get a big simple repair like this done. So this whole spine or spline and hub assembly exactly like that one was $100. So instead of trying to rebuild all the races of bearings and all bearing races and all that crap, it's easier just to buy the whole thing for $100. I actually had it shipped down next day to save me an hour drive to Columbus and back. 2 hours, I figured I'd get ahead on this, maybe do an estimate, and I'm better ahead for that. So much, if not all, this stuff I learned from my dad, and it's one of my main drives, is passing this stuff on, as my dad has passed on going on 10 years ago now. The reason, anytime you got to drive metal out of a metal thing, you want to use brass punches. Why? Because the brass is softer than the metal you're pushing or knocking out. And so if you're going to damage it, and you can still damage that with brass, but the brass is softer, so it's going to give more, and so you're not going to hopefully scratch, scar, or end or anything like that. Your metal pieces you've got to punch out. So use brass when driving out metal out of metal. And I say my main drive, as in like my why on Instagram, is to pass on as much of this stuff that I learned from my dad, because I feel it's such a blessing. I would be doing a disservice to not, because I'm not inherently smart, but my dad was. A lot from him. But this spindle's got to come out of here, so we're going to lube this backside with some PB Blaster, which is a great product, by the way. I don't get paid by them or sponsored by them. I sure wish, because I use a ton of it. PB Blaster is great stuff, penetrating catalyst. Then we're going to take this brass punch. We're going to drive this pin out the backside with a big bulb. The reason I had Britt video that one and was to show how hard the thing was driving out, but actually that would end up being the last bit it needed. But I really was wailing on that thing for a minute. So when you take on tasks like this, be ready, because it can get heavy quick. And I was holding that brass barehanded, but you can see, so the whole new piece. Hi, folks, welcome back here. Our part came. It was a little bit late. The UPS man said the plane was late at the airport, but whatever. So this is our new spindle, and this thing is going to go sliding in here. We're going to make a YouTube video out of this too, based off the amount of requests I've got about it, which is craziness. But this thing's going to go in here. One thing we're going to do is, this thing's brand new part, it really doesn't need it, but sometimes if it's in that kind of shape, you're going to take a piece of sandpaper or emery cloth or something, really clean that thing up, shine it up real nice. Same with the inside. We are going to clean this up on the inside here so we get good, a nice good slide in there. And start working that thing in there. Bolt our idler or our track roller on there. And this part was $100, which was easier than rebuilding this piece with all the different bearing races and all that crap. So when you can, buy the whole assembly kit, because it's going to be easier than rebuilding this and pressing those cups back on and all that stuff. So one thing too that could have been done yesterday, but this is something you want to be careful with, and it probably wouldn't have worked great in this situation, is you can put a torch on this to begin to heat this up to get this part to expand and not touching the old part, and this part expands, will allow you to help drive this thing out. Another thing somebody reminded me of for putting this one in, you can put this thing in the freezer to get it to contract just a little bit and then heat this up. You gotta be careful with that though, because that hot and cold can be issues and all that crap. So you can break stuff that way is what I'm getting at. Break stuff, bend stuff, you name it. With that said, we're gonna take, I got a piece of 400 grit sandpaper here and some Brillo pad or whatever the heck stuff's called. And so we're gonna get in here and just clean this out real good and try to get it nice and clean and smooth again, and then begin to get this thing worked in there. Now this is 400 grit. You can get a little more aggressive with this, or you can get a pneumatic tool in there, but you see all this junk it's bringing out. So we just want to make sure it's nice and smooth and no scratches and all that kind of stuff. So, or this Brillo type pad also would do pretty good. So get in there and get that thing cleaned out and just kind of make sure it's nice and smooth and all that stuff. Well, that sucker just slid right in there. So it's got a groove slot there. It's got to fit through on the other side, but man, that dude just went right in there. So you got to get it aligned a little bit on their side, but that went well. So it's time to put this bolt back into place here, and you want to always, best you can, get your parts books, read through it here. Now, one thing it's saying, and this is good to use on most any bolt, is to get Loctite on them. And this has got a reference or a note about using Loctite 242, which is great. Fortunately, I have this on hand, but this is something that helps keep those bolts from vibrating out of place. I can't find a spec for my torque wrench here for foot-pounds on it, so I guess it's just going to be tight as we can do it. So there you go. So if you have bolts and screws on, anything that are constantly vibrating out of place, you may try this, try Loctite or any kind of this thread locker. This is removable. Some of them are like nearly permanent, makes them really hard to get out, but this is a removable one, but it keeps them from, keeping bolts and things and nuts from vibrating off. So there we got our thread locker on there, and we're ready to go. Breaker bar is pretty handy when you need to get a lot of torque on there, but the problem with torque is you can break stuff that way. So we're going to begin to get, I wish I could find a spec on the torque setting on there, but we'll get her on there nice and tight. For now, it's going to be drawn into there as far till it bottoms out. All right, so I got it down real good and tight, and then I backed it off there to peek inside and make sure it pulled it in there far enough, and I'd like it to come a little bit more, I think. So I'm going to tighten it down again. This is something you're going to want to monitor for the first few hours of operation, and even periodically after that, make sure this thing's not working loose, because if the thing gets to where it's wobbling around in there, it's going to wear the heck out of these bushings and this whole assembly, and that is not good. So be sure to monitor a new install like that. So that spindle assembly's back on there. Now we're going to put our track roller on there, and again using the Loctite with the lug nuts. The lug nuts, they gave me a spec to 25 foot-pounds of torque. So with our lug nuts back on, just like a vehicle or anything, cross tighten. So start on one, go across, tighten the other, go that one. Always cross from each other. That way you get a good straight flat pull on there. A couple things too about working safely when you've got a machine up in the air. I've got one jack in front, two jacks in back, and then it's these beautiful pieces of black walnut. I've got so much of this stuff I can actually use black walnut this way, but anything we can to keep this machine safe. So always have your machine supported properly and safely. Got the tracks walked back up on there. That's always a task, but you got to figure out your best way to do that on and off. But on the ditch witch here, you undo that grease, and this is with a lot of track machines. You undo this grease fitting here. This machine is tensioned by grease generally. So you undo that grease fitting, and grease will come, shooting out of there, and you start hitting that extendable portion of the track, wherever it is, the tensioner, and grease will start coming out of there. And now we're ready to do the opposite. We're going to put start shooting grease back into there, take tension or put tension back on it. There's different levels of specifications for the amount of sag or tension on tracks. Ditch, which is general, is you put a 4-foot level across here, and you want a 1/2 inch of sag. And the reason you want a little bit of sag in these things is because if the tracks are super tight and you run over a rock or something, the tracks are not going to have room to give, and they're going to stretch instead. So always put these things to the proper track tension. All right, so getting the tracks tensioned up. You can see we're slowly getting the slack out of them there. Now that this is on there, per spec, 88 to 95 pound-feet of torque, by the way. A great video to watch on how to use a torque wrench. I actually just took a little refresher course on this. This YouTube link swipe up here. But that video on Chris Fick's YouTube page, I just heard of the guy just because I was YouTubing how to use a torque wrench, just making sure I was setting this thing properly. Great video if you don't know how to use one. Check it out. So to check track tension, they want you on a smooth, flat surface. I just pulled it up on the front walkway here, and you want a 1/2 inch of sag over this point here, and we do not have that, so I'm gonna have to loosen up that grease fitting and take some slack out of it here to get us to 1/2 inch.
Thanks for watching this video on the ditch witch repair there. It took, I think, roughly about 2 hours, all said and done. An hour to do the dismantle work, maybe 1.5 hours. May have been a little distracted with kids, I don't know. But did about 1.5 hours on the dismantling and then putting it back together. Probably about an hour, give or take, and then time putting tools away and stuff like that. So not too hard of repair. It was really kind of a fun one because it was really kind of basic, and you made great accomplishment with just one simple piece. I do recommend anytime you can just buy the cluster assembly, the whole spindle, instead of trying to replace just the bearings and stuff like that. It's a lot easier and probably just about as cost effective on the parts end of things. Because I bet you that bearing set's probably 40, 50, 60 bucks. I have no idea. And so the whole thing for $112 was totally worth it. I had it shipped to me. Columbus's Ditch Witch Parts West Side is roughly about 45 minutes from me when traffic's good. And so I had that thing shipped down next day, and that saved me an hour, 2 hours of driving pretty much. And that was time well spent, because that's time I could come into the office. I could get an estimate done maybe that's worth $10,000. So you run the ROI on that kind of stuff and begin to delegate out or subcontract out that kind of little menial tasks like that. That will be a big thing for your company, because your time to get an estimate out is way more valuable than just driving to get a part. So try to get Grandpa to go do that for you, or pay Grandma to do it, or your cousin or whatever. So try to delegate those tasks out the best you can, so you can spend money and spend time on the things that really matter in your company, which is running it. Again, I took this one in-house because we needed the machine back up and running on Monday, the following day, over the weekend there, and so I just fired it out and got it done. And it's kind of fun once in a while to get dirty and get some big tools out and do a repair like I used to do all the time back when the company was a little bit smaller, and we were still kind of grinding our way up. So, and we're always still grinding our way up. Nothing's changed, but I'm just not in the field as much doing that kind of grind. So that's that. Thanks for watching.